Hello, bonjour. This is the last part. I'm using the mic because it's still going to be streamed, and then it also is going to be is going to have a recording. Il va y avoir un enregistrement. Et si vous n'êtes pas d'accord, vous nous le dites maintenant. If you don't agree with the streaming and recording, you can tell us now. We cut you off from the view. Voilà. And that's why I have the microphone. Otherwise, we could have done it this way. But I think it's we thought it was important to have a round table. So I'm gonna mix in English and French. Je vais mélanger dans les deux. You don't have to do it. C'est juste mon idée. It's just my idea. I could do it, but you don't have to do it. You don't have force. You could speak your own language. Il y a pas de problème. Vous pouvez parler votre propre langage. L'idée de la table ronde, c'était de pouvoir quand même avoir un moment de discussion. The idea of the round table is to have a moment of discussion that is outside of the presentation, which even if we have already like some very strong debate, même si on avait eu des débats assez importants hier, maintenant on est un peu à l'horizontale, et at the horizontal level, so we could have a different discussion and mixed up some ideas that we started yesterday. Donc on peut démarrer des idées de ce qu'on a eu un petit peu hier, ce qu'on a fait. Donc il y a beaucoup de choses. There's a lot of things that have been said, and I don't think I will be able to resume very well all of it. But I put some ideas in the pots, and then we could mix up. I'm sure you're gonna have a lot of yourself, a lot of questions. Je suis sûr que vous en aurez aussi de votre côté par rapport aux questions qui se sont dites hier. In sort of a mixed up, I thought about this relation to technology and ancient practice, la relation de la technologie à la nouvelle pratique, the communities, how the impact and with this situation, also the feminization of technology, servers and programming. There's a few projects that work, and I think it's worth mentioning, on using different terms for servers and programming technology by feminizations of those way of talking. So I think we could also embrace these ideas. But the DIY and low consumption system relations to political vision of a future of technology. There's also a lot of way of doing your own machinery and create your own systems and DIY, like from radio, but to servers, to mailing, to different things, différentes choses qui peuvent permettre d'avoir une autre vision politique en créant soi-même ses propres serveurs et ses propres machines. Also, logiciels. So it's related to free software too, and open hardware and all this thing. So la relation avec les logiciels libres et le open hardware. Also, I want to mention a few projects that is in relation to what you say, Nicolas, about AI, and so because we were working on the forgetting AI, or the Alzheimer AI, we could say. So the AI that forget what they've been doing. Or we also gonna work next week on the Entropy, qui est entropy and AI, how you bring entropy and AI. So continue to think about this different vision of AI that is not about gathering informations on the people. So it's also another vision of this. I want to go back also on the math and rationality in relation to colonialism and visions of of technology. So debate these questions. I think it would be interesting. Donc débattre aussi la question des mathématiques et de la rationalisation en lien avec la colonisation. It also connect to paternalizations and colonizations in technology, but also in the way societies functions, and how to get out of it. How to get out of it when you lost the roots and your communities. In Western world, we also lost the connections with our ancestors. We are like permanent migrants, and so how we reconnect with ancient path and a different way of beyond colonialism. So c'est aussi des questions comment on reconnecte avec des pratiques ancestrales et des rapports au-delà de la colonisation. Et comment on sort de là, en fait, comment on sort de cette côté paternaliste et colonisation, en même temps en recréant des liens. Mais peut-on le faire? Could we do it? Par exemple, bon, je veux rentrer dans le détail, mais voilà. I think I throw you that and then whatever. It's debate, so I'm not sure. We have 2 mics. There's 2 mics.
I prefer the radio one. Yeah, but just to say, starting from your first point about technology and the ancient world, I would maybe put this into the context of, okay, well, but what is technology? And we tend to think, I guess its generation does that. It tends to think of technology as something that it's super contemporary. And in these times, we tend to think of technology as something, I guess it's the trend, the popular culture tends to think of technology as something which is fundamentally linked to, computers, digital information, AI, and so on. But if you think of it for a moment, and I go back to 2 paradigms. One is, think of the Bible. It starts, and, essentially you have God creating man from clay. And if you think about it for the moment, clay was the state of the art of the technology of that time. It was the most technological thing available. You could use clay and you could shape things. You could create pottery, you could create, all the ancient world of that time was fundamentally linked to clay. And it was a very technological practice, actually. So you have technology appearing, fused with, I don't know, like metaphysics, religion, call it how you want, but it's fundamentally linked with that. And it was something that drew inspiration from technological practices of the time. And then you have a kind of a myth, that God or whoever created humans using technological means. So technology is not something new or contemporary at all. And the other paradigm I want to throw in the table is that of Derrida. Derrida talk about humans being necessarily prosthetic beings. And the ultimate prosthesis is language. And this is also something we tend to forget, that language is technology. It's not something we are born with. But it's so fundamental to our culture. We are humans, we are anthropy, we are the beings we are, and we have the culture we have in all its differences and all its micro differentiating, across the world. But we are all this fundamentally because we use language. And language is something external to humans. It's not part of our biology. It's not part, we are not born with it. And if you just leave a human somewhere alone, a person, they won't develop a language. It's something external, something that we are taught to do. And this is the ultimate process. So we are a certain kind of creature according to Derrida, and not just Derrida, posthumanism in general, that we are humans because we are constantly augmenting and redefining ourselves through technological means. Be it for language, clothing, computers, radio, or something else.
So does that mean we should not think about it?
Now, I want to respond to clay. Because I don't know if you know the legend of Golem. Does everybody know? Okay, this was man's attempt to make something out of clay.
Yeah.
And of course it went wrong. That was the roots of the Frankenstein myth. one of my colleagues at the Collège de France is a paleoanthropologist, and we talked about art for the last 10 years. And he is a specialist in Neanderthal. And when I first met him, I asked him, they could speak, right? And he said, yes, without the tiniest doubt. And I said, then they had art. He said, no, they didn't have art. And I said, well, coming from art, we kind of think that we had art before we had speech, and it was a way of communicating. And he's come around to that now. He's totally the world's best defender of Neanderthal art. But when we were talking in our group, he was sending me prehistoric images. And he sent me a biface. And it was a biface that was found in England. I asked him the age. He said between 250 and 500,000 years old. Okay, that's Heidelbergensis. That's the ancestor to Neanderthal. And this was already an artistic expression in the fact that the biface was sculpted in a way that brought out a shell fossil in the middle of it. So this was already at the level of Heidelbergensis, somebody making an artistic and aesthetic decision by bringing that shell out and giving it value. That makes art pretty old. I think art has actually been with us for 6 million years. It's always been there. It just evolved with everything else and became more and more sophisticated. But it was one of our earliest means of expression.
Let's go back to clay. I think everybody's familiar with the clay tablets from Sumer and Babylon that they wrote on in cuneiform. And these clay tablets, probably most famous one has the Epic of Gilgamesh on it, but that's quite late in history. For thousands of years before, they were used for accounting purposes. In other words, numbers and enumeration. And in fact, if you look at some clay tablets that were used for inventory of a farm, these were agricultural economies, they look a lot like spreadsheets. And it's both a superficial but also a more profound relation between those two things. And if you want to go back even earlier, the earliest forms of enumeration we found are about 15,000 years old, Ice Age, antlers with marks on them that are pretty provably calendric markings. So that is the origin of counting. They may not have even had number, but they counted in what's called concrete counting. And then, so you can trace this technology of enumeration back into the Paleolithic, and then into the very beginnings of urban civilization. And what came from counting in numbers, of course, if you take two lines of numbers and put them orthogonally, perpendicularly to each other, you get a matrix. And that matrix is a grid. And the grid, which is a raster, among other things, but is also a matrix that can be used for all kinds of calculations, is the beginning of urban civilization, which is also the beginning of true social hierarchy. There were sort of nominal social hierarchies before, but leaders, rulers, those who would rule, had no way of actually perceiving, and this gets back to the idea of the prosthesis that I think you were talking about, perceiving what they ruled and what they owned. So all of a sudden, or not all of a sudden, over a period of time, leaders could tax people and they could manage agricultural estates. And they did it through this secondary realm of representation and abstraction. And that started, say, 6,000 years ago. So you have a history that actually a lot of things have happened in between. But if you look at this history of enumeration and mathematical, geometric, and ultimately optical representation, you see the pixel going from like about an acre down to this minuscule amount. And with each step, there is a more powerful exercise of power, a projection of human imagination onto the natural world, and also the intrusion of things like patriarchy, but all forms of authoritarianism. Because without some remote virtualized world, the first one we see are these archives in ancient Sumer, virtual representations of space. Herodotus says the pharaohs, Sesostris, divided the land into into a grid, and that was so.
So I interfere also because I think it's no, stay. It's also part of the debate. If you want to interfere,
yeah,
the
yeah,
mic,
yeah,
like
actually,
what I just did.
Yep.
I give it to you after.
Please,
But do you saying that math is the origin of paternalistic society?
I think it
I've heard that. No, I'm the only one
Yeah,
to hear that.
I think it enables.
No, you just said.
I think it enables it. But some maybe.
Well, sorry, yeah. This, I'm just adding, so you can continue after this. But we were discussing yesterday, whether what comes first, whether the patriarchy comes first or a kind of progress-driven commerce comes first. And it's really interesting that what you're basically pointing out. I mean, obviously, it's because sometimes I think it's not the patriarchy is not that's the symptom of the progress-driven kind of commerce thing, and the patriarchy has become, the tool of that, or the mouthpiece of that. And what you're saying pretty much is, a very nice historical summary of that.
Well, it's an enabling factor. I mean, it didn't have to be patriarchy. Maybe because of something to do with our own society or historical accident, but it enables the projection of power from an individual onto a mass and from human imagination onto nature.
Okay, to think all this, sorry, I'm intruding like j'ai introduit. Two things on this. First, I'm personally very much aligned with theories stemming from archaeology. They are very contemporary, the work of Colin Renfrew and Labros Malafouris and so on. What these people say essentially is that it's not that humans invented counting. It was through cultural practices and through materials themselves that the materials learn us how to count. And he actually used this, these pieces of clay as a paradigm of this. So what these people claim that actually has happened was that initially they had pottery and they would put inside, like oil and other goods that they used to use for commerce. And then they would start marking the contents, using this, how the kunoid...
They would actually engrave
the seals.
So
it would mark it with like a seal, and okay, this has oil, this has plant, weed or something. So, in through the years, and as a form of practice, they start marking if the quantity was greater, they would start putting 2 seals or 3 seals. So the argument is that essentially through this kind of practice, we learn how to count. Okay, and it's a very interesting theory, and he takes that in many different levels. He explains how, the ancient Mycenaean, tablets, the very first forms of it was kind of spreadsheet essentially, but it was also a form of externalizing memory. So for the very first time, you had people who no longer have to remember things. They can just put them on clay and have a permanent storage machine. So that's one thing. And the other thing is going back to math. And I think these are related, with all the situation here, that it's not that we wake up one morning, as a civilization and we invented counting and stuff. It's that, we just keep doing things in the course of life we live. And the world that surrounds us and, the materials and the practices that emerge and surface the situation teach us to do things, and they shape our minds accordingly. And this is what stems out from archaeology, that the plasticity of our brain, it's called neuroplasticity, that by doing things, the world shapes our brain, literally, and creates new kind of synapses and so on. And this has been shown in a number of studies, like this is one of my favorite, the taxi drivers in London, that before GPS, they observed that they had a different anatomy, in the hippocampus or something. Anyhow, but going back to math, historically, what has happened is that math emerged as a very practical tool, like from geometry, really. It was a very practical tool to kind of for governance, in a sense. It was used for governance, So you could say, okay, my land ends here, your land is there, and you can make calculations. But it was a tool. It was a tool. It may have started a little bit like a theoretical device, and it's not accidental that again it was linked a little bit with metaphysics, through Pythagoras and all these people, that they would very without much effort, they would link mathematics, to sound, to vibrations, and to kind of esoteric doctrines. But very soon it became a tool to do things, and then you come to the Middle Ages and later on to the Renaissance, and you have like calculus, and people were trying to solve, to find solutions to problems they would face. So mathematics was a tool, really. But what has happened rapidly in the late 19th century was this idea that they should somehow unite together all the existent different math disciplines. So how do you connect algebra with geometry? How do you found mathematics in a way, that calculus, geometry, and all this? And then they came up, with it. It's I don't know if
I'm
you're
just
aware
gonna
of this.
interrupt.
Yeah, go on.
Hold on. Is the microphone on? Yeah. It's on. Okay. I'm just going to completely go somewhere else
Okay.
because I don't know how maths and geometry and everything connects back to feminism and post-colonialism and all the rest of it. So I'm just going to go in a totally other direction. But thank you for everything. It's all really interesting. I was thinking about the lack of Indigenous voices and things here, and thinking like, so where are they? And they are out there, and I'm not an expert, it's not my field, but just recently there was a big exhibition of Maori digital art in a gallery in New Zealand, and there's a big article about it on the website with, 30 or so artists, Maori artists, who are working at the interface of traditional Maori culture and the futuristic advance of the online world. I'm just reading off the website. The show asks us to expand our view of Maori art, a snapshot of Maori life in the digital age. So there's, a lot of people doing interesting things out there that we should be looking at and listening to. And I also wanted to mention Greta Lowe, who's an Australian artist who lives in Germany, and she had a big project a few years ago, actually at Furtherfield it was presented, called Networking the Unseen. And Greta's not Aboriginal herself, but she worked with an Aboriginal community in a really remote area in Central Australia, and basically gave them a whole lot of digital tools, or worked with them around what they wanted. And they developed apps that were things where they could make their own screensaver or things on the phone. So looking at how if they actually have input into the design of these technologies, instead of just taking WhatsApp or being given these things, what are they going to come up with? So it tackled subjects ranging from digital colonialism and cultural marginalisation, diversity, empowerment, with an increasingly connected online world, to universal concerns around cultural change as a result of technological migration. The exhibition extended our focus to the extremities of the global digital network and subtly proposed ways to claim power back from centralising forces of control, to use these tools for positive change, for intercultural exchange and empowerment for marginalised communities. So these are just tiny examples, and I think next time you have a festival, you should look and invite some people, because that's, if we want to address these issues, what we actually need to do is listen to these people and not sit around here as a bunch of privileged Western people discussing the history of mathematics. And then also on the feminist side, I want to talk about the Sister Server, which is a feminist server. So it's a bunch of women that met through the Eclectic Tech Carnival, which is a network of originally women, but now like feminist women identifying people, who meet sporadically. They met in Athens last, I think, and we're meeting in June in Berlin. So if people are interested, I can give you the details of that. And it's an unconference, it's a hacker meeting, but it's also with art, ETC, Eclectic Tech Carnival, so it's about art and tech. And we do things like pull apart computers and have NASA scientist people and VPN tunneling experts who are part of the feminist hacker network coming and explaining things that are so over my head, but I just find it interesting to listen to. And the Sister Server is a part of this ETC, where women and women identifying people can set up a server, administer it, and talk about how we use this technology as feminists. What are we doing when we're a bunch of feminists trying to run a server? What's the language that we're using? How are we going to use it? What are we going to do with it? One of the things that I use on it is a Mastodon instance. So we're looking at the tools that we're using for social media and how we want to use them, what we want to do with them, what do we want to use. So that's another example, and it's not the only one. There's actually in the Spanish language world, there's quite a lot of feminist technical networks, and I think there's the Anarcha server, which is another feminist server that's run out of Barcelona, California, maybe, I can't remember now. But yeah, I want to say that there are all these things there, and yes, they're based on all of this background of everything, of all the learning and all the art of history, but they're the things that we should be looking to now. And somebody else can interrupt me.
I grabbed this microphone, inspired by all this conversation. I think, I have some thoughts. I'm not sure how they will weave out. But I think it's really interesting that we're thinking how technology ends up kind of like containing a spirit, in a way, a force that drives technology that then drives us, and then we drive it, and etc. But talking about how technology can, or the spirit of technology can be patriarchy, or it can be many other things. But it seems like counting, and not only counting, but the fact that more means better, and ended up prevailing. At least in many of the technologies that end up dominating us, right? So. For some reason, I think we also need to remember that technology can contain resistance, and perhaps that's much of the work that we all do, right? As in, like the counter action, the alternative to this domination, the alternative to thinking that more is better, the alternative to the corporate greed that sends Dawn a message every 15 minutes, reminding, and the fact that, I remember, Dawn, you were saying yesterday, I don't want to be governed by an algorithm, but at the same time, I would want to be governed by an algorithm if the algorithm is beautiful, if the spirit of the algorithm contains beauty and wants really the best for all, whatever that best is, perhaps not more. But how
Define beauty.
Yeah, that's what I use here, actually. Yeah. Define beauty. What is it?
magic?
For who? Beauty for you in your eyes, or beauty for
No,
someone?
I mean, I am aware that beauty is certainly a very subjective thing, but perhaps I'm just saying beauty to provoke an alternative to whatever progress wants from us, right? More accumulation, domination, property, and all of these things, right? And so, what if beauty was what we pursued? And yes, define beauty, but what are the alternatives? And perhaps because we are all artists, I put the word beauty there on the pole. I'm not sure.
Yeah, you claim technology is something human, but that's not really true, because also animals have their languages, and they're using technologies like the ants and the bees, and they have very complex languages, and maybe they even have their own form of art. Because what do we know about what whales are communicating, for instance? Maybe they do some art performances. We don't understand anything. We just think we are the top of the... Yeah.
That just reminded me, I talked the other day to a woman in Germany who's doing a project collecting bird sounds, and she was talking about some birds in Australia. I don't know what bird it is, but apparently they are endangered now, and they sing together in a chorus, and they are becoming that they don't have enough birds to keep doing their song, and there are people that are trying to like learn the songs so that they can sing with the birds to make sure that the birds don't lose their song because they're, you know, but this is a choir of birds who have a particular songs that they sing that is art.
Tu vas être obligé de traduire un peu, je crois. Parce que...
Bien sûr.
Oui, si vous comprenez. Oui, je pense que la question de la technique ou de la technologie,
So the question of the technique and technology.
c'est la question de la mémoire qui est inclue dans les
It's
objets.
a question of the memory of the object.
Donc c'est ce que quelqu'un comme Sylvain Auroux, donc
Someone like Stephen
un
Orr.
linguiste français, appelait la grammatisation. Hein?
Sorry. I'm sorry, I was doing simultaneously.
Parle pas avant moi,
I'll do it again. So someone like who?
Sylvain Auroux
Sylvain Roux.
appelle la grammatisation.
He calls the grammatization.
Et Simondon aussi, que
Alors,
vous
aussi
connaissez
Simondon.
sans doute. Et la différence entre, par exemple, un langage animal ou un langage humain,
And the difference between the language of a human and an animal.
c'est que finalement on peut transmettre, et ça, donc symboliquement, les signes de l'invention.
So we could transmit symbolically and that is the sign of what? Evolution.
Ouais, evolution.
Evolution.
Et les objets, finalement, les outils, sont des mémoires.
So the object and the tools are the memory.
Et je pense que l'être humain se différencie globalement de l'animal par cette question de la mémoire.
And so the humans is differentiate itself by this question of the memory.
D'où effectivement cette question primordiale, et là je switch un petit peu, mais des intelligences artificielles qui reposent la question des mémoires.
So we come back to this question of the artificial intelligence that put back this question of the memory.
I do want to take this back to mathematics and counting. And actually, the person who discovered concrete counting is a female scholar named Denise Schmott-Besserer in the 70s and 80s. It was based on her research. You can guess why. Maybe she's not well known, although it's groundbreaking and completed the research. But we're using these technologies as a projection of our memory. So the point well taken on the externalization of memory and distributed cognition. We don't just think inside our brain, we think collectively through technical tools. My issue is that I wonder if these tools are inherently destructive to other forms of thinking, especially animals. You know, we're animals, but we have managed to, through technical means, dominate and suppress all these other forms of communication, whether it's choirs of birds or fungal networks that we were exploring yesterday. So I think it's quite dangerous to engage in a medium without a thorough understanding of its origins. That would be my point. But points well taken that we need alternatives. At the same time, I think we should do these alternatives in the most mindful way possible, understanding that the tools inherently may have an inherent destructiveness. And I'm not taking a position on that, actually. I'm not sure.
I can take a position on that, but yeah, after you.
But I think techniques like writing and writing, they are bad for the memory, because in other cultures, everything, everybody has to keep all the stories in their brains, and as soon as you start to write down things, you are forgetting more. Memory is training, so it's counterproductive to write and to have that clay countings.
Yes, I pass you the mic. I just want to complete this and come back to the indigenous people. I think the problem also in the festivals and those questions of where are the indigenous people here, where we live, because that's also a question that's been really like violence within our countries. Like if you take France, and this is why I'm joining you on this, the way to colonize France itself was by writing the language of the people here. So what they did is they say to people, how do you say how are you in your language? So they will use their own language, the indigenous people of France, and then the Breton, for example, then they will write down and say, you are saying this, now you're gonna say this. And then you're gonna stop to speak your language, or you go in jail, or you die. And then that's using writing to colonize your own people and destroy any indigenous people with different way of thinking. That was before to go elsewhere, they destroy the people here. And then sometimes you could feel that you have these connections to this, to the past, and then where are those people, and why we can't reconnect with? Because it's true for New Zealand, for Australia. You're talking about those indigenous people that are saved because somehow remotely cut from those horrendous. The heart of the colonization where we are, but sometimes we reflect on where are our communities and our roots, and we see we got lost because it's disappearing, and we had this discussion, So I want to emphasize this idea that the writings is absolutely the tools of colonization, and then the tools that destroy the ancient way of using memories.
It's not only the writing, it's the breaking of the language, because in Australia the Aborigines had hundreds of different languages, and when the colonisers were doing their colonising thing, one of their techniques was to separate people and put them in camps where there were like maybe 200-300 Aboriginal people in one camp, but none of them that could speak to each other because they all had different languages. And so many of these languages were lost and just completely gone. And the same happened with Maori language as well. It was not allowed to be spoken in schools. Children were punished. And a lot of Maori parents believed that the way to get on in the world was to speak English, and didn't. So in the 50s, Maori language was really dying, and it was only from the 80s onwards that it's been sort of resurrected. And the same with some Aboriginal languages in Australia, but there are, hundreds that have gone. And I think everywhere all over the world, even in Bavaria, there's been, oppression of the language, and that they should speak Hochdeutsch, and then there's the sort of Renaissance or people trying to rescue it. Or Britain, look at Gaelic and everything. Yeah.
Cornish, Welsh, Gaelic.
Yeah.
Many.
Yeah, and when the language is lost, then so many other things are lost as well. Like, the memory of things, like people that have singing traditions, even the epic stories of Homer and everything that were sung always before they were written down. And if you're singing to people that don't understand your language, then everything breaks, and that's how they crush and colonize.
Well, so I was just going to say, to respond to Eva and say that, yes, writing maybe interferes with your ability to remember, but it's also could be seen as an extension of your memory, right? And especially in situations like this, maybe a generation later, if there's a recording, whether it's writing or an audio recording, it might be possible for somebody to relearn things that could have been lost. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it's bad, although it frees us up to remember other things. Hopefully not just stupid things, but yeah.
But let's go back. There are two things that are very connected here. One is that we talk about tools, technological tools like writing and so on. But I think that this is already misleading. These things are not tools. They are part of our cognitive systems. It's part of what makes us who we are. It's not something that we use. It's that something we are intrinsically connected with. And when it comes back to, talking about decolonizing the world and the indigenous culture and all this, I think we should be super careful, all of us, including me, in something. And first of all, I don't identify myself as white. And I come from a country that has been colonized and probably still is. And I'm, of course, male, But I can't speak on behalf of some other oppressed subject. And I think this is very problematic, because if I start talking as if, I knew, and this as if I would understand, the problems of Aboriginal people and so on. I'm open to listen, and I am open to provide opportunities for them to express themselves. But this is Europe, people. And Europe has done that already historically, lots of time. It's a European tradition to project European thought to other cultures. And we've seen that happen, with exoticism and so on, and they would go and they would kind of try to rediscover Europe in the Amazonas, in Australia and so on. And we don't want to be these people. So, coming back to language, the question is, okay, but how do all these people feel about their language being lost? Because I also come from a country that our language is not at all dominant. Nobody speaks my language, it's just 2 countries in the world that speak in my country. So if you go back and they ask, okay, but are you happy about that? Would you exchange your language? And historically, in many cases, I don't say that this is a rule, but in many cases, and I have actually encountered that through my own work, I go to places, and I did this project that I was collecting stories, for instance. And I went to Faroe Islands and to Iceland, and I was asking fishermen, and simple layman people to tell stories in their language. And they were like, some people refused and say, no, I will talk in English. They don't want some of those to be those people that are exoticized by me, so that I can do my great project. They want to speak English. They want to be part of the contemporary world. Some of them, not everybody. So it takes some cautious here because, it would be great so that I can go to the Amazon, and find indigenous people, or in Australia, and they maintain this very super traditional ancient world so that I go there as a tourist and be immersed in that. But what do these people want? And how can I understand it if I don't speak their languages, if I don't know their culture? So for starter, one thing that I think that the West, if you somehow think you're part of the West, one thing that you should do is learn their languages. Dedicate time. Study their literature, study their poetry. Try to speak in different languages than yours. Because then, we've done that in the past, and we all know where it leads, especially in this country and in this continent. So it's a very important thing to give opportunities to others to talk about their point of view. But we should be very cautious here because sometimes we are just using them as a medium so that we can project European ideals and values to countries and that have nothing to do with them. They have their own values.
I'm going to interrupt. I don't remember the name of there's a book called Capturing Sound. Is it Mark Katz? Do you remember? Anybody remember? Mark Katz, he wrote about the advent of audio recording and how it changed the world. And I think that might be interesting because we do not remember when the world got writing. Right, but in the advent, he looks at, if I'm remembering correctly, what happened in a couple of different places. First of all, it meant that we could listen back to something and that you had to be in the same place. You didn't have to be in the same place as the sound originally was. So as a result, I think there were 2 different instances, but I don't have the book here, where he discussed cassettes that were being sent around Indonesia, and I can't remember, it either made the music more diverse or less diverse. It could be like people were passing things to each other and learning from each other, but in other cases, everybody started listening to the same music. And I think we're more seeing things where, like you're saying, that the French language became something that was inflicted on everybody, right? But sometimes the technology could be a way for people to learn about new things and increase the diversity of what they're listening to or making.
Just want to discuss about the slavery, because it's funny to discuss about that here, because Nantes is one of the best, harbor of France. Donc it's very funny. And I think maybe the discussion about the language and the slavery with the language and the disparition of memory. We are all now outside our language with the binary digital language. And we, I think, not more here speak this language very well. 01, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1. So we are all outside our memory. And that's why I think one of the problems today to understand finally the future, to imagine the future. And I talked yesterday with Benjamin Breton. Maybe you know this guy. This is a theoretician. He lived in California. And he wrote two famous books, The Stack. This is one, this is an abstraction to understand the world from the ground to the cloud, the computer, the user. It's very interesting. And the last, this is a terraformation. And he told us that the human mind is to destroy the earth. The final way, this is a destruction totally, because inside us we have a certain logics, and this logic conduct us to destruct earth. And maybe the solution is to use the computer or a formal method to rearrange that, maybe. But he told us it's now, we have to do something. That's why I don't know if it was terrible, but maybe the only.
I'm not sure where I land on whether, it's that, do guns kill people or do people kill people kind of thing with technology. I feel like, technology is being wielded by us. And so we can choose to use it for good purposes or for bad purposes. And so say with writing, yes, it may have, I can't, I love words, I love writing. So while it may have diminished my ability to write a Homeric poem, it has increased a whole other way of writing and a whole other way of making beautiful things. And so, writing in itself is not the destructive tool. It's the way people used writing that is a destructive tool. Writing has been equally incredibly positive and amazing and created unbelievable unbelievable beauty, and also allowed us to communicate in particular ways. And I'm kind of really looping back to the idea of when you originally said that language is a technology, and that we weren't biologically made with language. We weren't biologically necessarily made with this language, but we were made with the desire to communicate. And just as animals are made with the desire to communicate, and that, yes, maybe they do have their own languages and their own worlds that they're living in. I'm going to flip to the other thing that keeps running through my mind when we go with this discussion as well, which is the idea of whether technology is outside nature or within nature. And there's the whole Nietzschean idea that actually, technology is actually part of nature. The whole problem is that we divide it. If we have made technology, we are nature, and therefore technology is an extension of nature, and maybe the fact that we view it differently is actually part of its destructiveness. Whereas if we viewed it as part of nature, then we wouldn't be putting it up against nature. We wouldn't be making technology that destroys things. We would be going, how does nature function? Oh, nature destroys things as well. Nature is everything that we existing in. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, but if we separate it out, then we allow it to have these more malevolent purposes. Whereas if we are using technology to serve nature in the same way that nature kind of sustains itself, then technology can be, a very positive force. And sorry, just one more thing. And also the fact of, the way, the argument for how nature, and I'm going, I really liked the way you described this, that it comes from embodied cognition. We have developed technologies in response to our environment and what our environment is asking of us. And so we go, how do I interact with this environment? We invent ways to interact with our environment because the environment is asking something of us. And so it's actually a relation, not a kind of addition or a separation.
Very, very quickly, just to say that also animals and other things, they use technology of a very different kind than our technology. Just that. So I think it's a little bit more chaotic.
I think I wanted to join Gail, thinking there on the part about us, everybody being, every part of what we're doing is in some way nature. I think, and this aspect of us separating ourselves from nature, which comes from the issues of the environment and the issues of communication and organisation of people between themselves, which sort of makes me think, because I think I read Charlie Gear's book, Art, Time and Technology, which also talks about, at the beginning of the book, how language is technology. Language is the second technology after the rock, which allowed us to free our jaw. So instead of opening nuts with our teeth, we use the rock, and then we can speak to each other instead of opening food. But it comes back to food in the end in some ways, because one of the essence of survival is the necessity for food and communicating around food and everything like this. And wars have been fought over the fact that there isn't enough food, or there isn't enough commerce to bring enough food to different countries. I'm thinking about even the First and Second World War in Europe, for example. One of the biggest technological revolutions was the agricultural revolution, which changed the way that Europe kind of stabilized itself up until now, because of this surplus even of food. But that's a separation from nature. That's a controlling of the land in order to increase our populations and our successes as a species over and above everything else that is around us. I think that's what I'm thinking about.
I want to share an experience that I had in communication in Africa. I was just talking, I think it was with Jean-Marie, we were talking about this the other day. I spent 6 years in Africa, and part of it was in the Congo, and it was a part of the Congo that was responsible for inventing the talking drum. And that technology absolutely blew me away, and I was quite close to someone who wrote about it. African languages are tonal, and most of them are two-tone languages. And the drums in the Congo duplicated those two tones. So they could send a combination of those two tones to communicate. But as you can imagine, in a language with two tones, those two tones and their combinations could mean many words. So in order to distinguish a word, they had to develop a sentence that would make that word unique. And for instance, the example that the guy gave me was white man. And so that had two tones. So in order to communicate the word white man, they had to develop a whole sentence that was unique to that idea. And so the sentence was, the man who came from the forest with leaves in his hand. And so the combination of two tones of that particular phrase designated white man. They walked around with this in their memory. They had to memorize all these incredibly elaborate sentences to transmit a word. And so you realize just how important and fundamental memory actually is, because it wasn't written anywhere. It was all in their heads. but they all had to know and share that same particular memory. Now, the guy who told me this actually wrote a book about it, which I have. And he was a British missionary, and he learned how to do it. And when I was there, this was the period of the Mercenary Rebellion in the early 60s. And the mercenaries had taken over the city of Kinshasa, and the Congolese army was on the other side of the river bombarding the city. The mercenaries left, but the Congolese army didn't know that, so they continued bombarding the city. So he got on the roof of a building and got his drum out and drummed and said, the evil men with the weapons have left, and the bombardment stopped. Now, this was transmitting long distance. This is wireless communication. And this is very, 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 very old. And so what I learned from this particular lessons was the importance of human memory. And the human memory is actually in the primitive part of the brain. So it's one of the first things that we actually had as human beings, was memory. And that's the limbic area, the hippocampus and amygdala. And it is the seat of two things, memory and emotion. So what made us human was memorizing our emotions, and it's the beginning of symbolic thought. And when I confronted this, it absolutely blew me away, because it was just so many things that came together in one formula to allow us to understand actually why we're here talking about communication technology.
Just to point out the fact that we talk about all these things now, but somehow implicitly we all deal as if for something special as a species. But I don't think this is. I mean, there are many species that are much more successful than we are. Other species also use technology. And the fact that we use technology and that we do all these great things and that we build spacecraft it doesn't mean necessarily, that because we're doing bigger things, and more fancy things, that we are more advanced in any way. I mean, if we get rid of these ideas of, good, bad, advanced, advanced cultures, not advanced cultures, and so on, and we just see the world in a more kind of rhizomatic fashion, where not in a particularly hierarchical fashion, just like the internet is, you have things here, there, and you think about rats or cockroaches, I mean, how successful we are. They can't get rid of the rats in New York. So this is a very successful species. And it's a species that actually utilizes our technology, it adapts to our technology, it adapts to our cities, plants, microbes, viruses. You had like a corona pandemic. That was a successful species. Right, so it still is. It still is. And you had like actually something like a great big deal of our DNA, it's because of virus that they use us so that, they live millennia and even more than that. Cockroaches, I mean, I grew up in the city that they are everywhere and you can't get rid of that. It's impossible, and they will always be there. And they have their own culture. And then I go back to Nicolas, and I think this is very important to understand that culture is not a human privilege. And personally, I love the idea, and I've done that in my work, I speculate about the possibility of non-human kind of cultures. What would be a robotic culture? We don't know. But we can speculate, we can, utopic thinking is something that we can do. So we can maybe, think about cockroach cultures and ashtray cultures and other kind of cultures, and imagine.
Okay, we haven't gotten around, and I think this is for Gail. Where in this does things like Afrofuturism and Sun Ra fit? Because the point of that was to imagine a future maybe outside of this world where African Americans, Black Americans didn't feel like they were just under the thumb. They could go, I mean, there's a Space is the Place, the movie, they go to outer space. Yeah. So I just wanted to know, like, starting with Gail, like maybe you can comment on that, because there's also, well, it's also, because a lot of it is also about science fiction. In the case of Sun Ra, there's also other aspects of it.
I'm not actually a particular specialist in the kind of Afrofuturist area, but it certainly has led a really interesting development in science, sonic theory, which is sonic fiction. And so Kodwo Eshun actually has written one of these, seminal texts about listening and Afrofuturism as this kind of, and he completely breaks style, like the whole text. Of course, at this present moment in time, I can't remember the name of it. It's got sun in the title. So can someone Google Kodwo Eshun? Thank you. It's Kodwo Eshun, Eshun. More bright than the sun, I think, something like that. And he goes very much into how music more brilliant than the sun, and how music, is this incredibly freeing thing. And I suppose that's what I wanted to come back to, maybe, that to bring things back to sound and listening. And I think it was something that Marinos said. At the very core, I mean, listening is the way that we communicate, and listening is...
But with Afrofuturism, or at least with Sunrise, it's also about the costumes and the idea that they could go to a new place with the technologies so that things would be different.
Yes.
And so just this idea, it could be any kind of futurism, and I think it fits into our conversation. I would really love to hear more
I
about
just want to say that I grew up with this stuff, and I think this is super interesting and super great, and massively, as a statement, claiming your space in this universe, not just the world. And they supported it very well. So thanks for bringing this up.
I think actually look at allofuturism. It's a concept from Marcus Novak, who's a thinker and maker at University of California, Santa Barbara. So it's Novak. And he's got a really crisp definition of that allofuturism. But I wanted to go back to the point I think Gail started about, is technology part of nature? And I absolutely think it is. I mean, Homo faber is a way of looking at it. And it really made me think about James Lovelock and the Gaia hypothesis, the work on Gaia, which was done with Lynn Margulis, again, a female biologist in this case, the person who discovered that mitochondria were symbiotes with other bacteria or protobacteria that formed the first eukaryotes. So she really triggered this work about Gaia and the whole interconnectedness of it, someone we should remember, along with James Lovelock. But there are 3 editions of his book, Gaia. And in the first one he says, look, we're in the 70s, we're on the road to destruction, because it's obvious that humanity, with its sort of technological expressions, which are part of nature. I mean, nature is very destructive, and the coronavirus is just really nature's attempt to redress the imbalance of humanity. I mean, normally you have an invasive species, humans, rats, cockroaches, really good examples of invasive, destructive species. So, in fact, the rats and the cockroaches are really successful, along with rock doves, pigeons, because of humans. But this is just the way nature works. Nature experiments with things and then cuts back. And if you read not the book, which you've probably read, but the introduction to the book, by about 20-some years ago, he says, well, actually, this is like the Great Oxygenation Event, where these early forms of life excreted oxygen, but it was also toxic for them. And this was 3 billion years ago. And in fact, killed off almost all those forms of life. But, the small amount developed resistance to oxygen. In fact, started using oxygen as an energy source. Really powerful oxidant. So each of our cells has a little fire inside. And so there's mitochondria, actually, that used oxygen. It used to be really toxic to the first forms of life. And he says, look, information is sort of like oxygen. And we're releasing information as a natural force that's bouncing around the world. The third introduction, the guy's 99, so it's easy to take this perspective. He says, humanity isn't evil. We're just doing what animals do. which I think the point that we're just, these technological expressions are just expressions of our animal nature, but we're not going to survive our activities just as so many other animals haven't survived. But I guess coming back to this thing where, so I could look at this deterministic way, but I also want to think, well, we do have a choice, and I think each of us have been talking about that choice, and we've talked about listening and memory, and it's just incredible to preserve these languages. But actually, just a point about Greek, it's still spoken in Magna Graecia down in Puglia, but you have to go really listen for a long time. I worked there, and a colleague of mine, Paola Prestini, did a lot of work, and people will speak Greco still, 2,000 years later, in Puglia. So there are these things. So just thinking about the shows that Helen was talking about and everybody, maybe we just need to step back and listen and step back and not, it seems like our survival depends on it, but also it might make for more interesting lives. And then I think you brought up forgetting at the beginning. And it's such a tension because it's like, well, do we want to lose these languages? But then forgetting is so important. And of course, in oral transmission, things get changed and they're evolving. So
yeah.
And that also reminds me when you were talking about humans being wired for destruction, and then you were saying how nature is destructive anyway. And I was thinking, well, is destruction really so bad? No. I mean, the whole universe is based on series of destruction. Life is, we're born and we die. Like, why do we have it in our heads that destruction is such a terrible thing? There's all these gods and goddesses like Kali the destroyer and all these different kind of myths, and I think we need to try and it's another binary. It's like survival or destruction. Well, we survive to be destroyed, and I think we need to relax about destruction maybe.
I think it sounds like we could end there, but it's not finished. So
destroyed it.
It's perfect. Let's go now and get drunk and everything.
No,
and
but something will survive. something will survive.
So 90s.
There'll be new. There'll be some sort of maybe the Stadacine, maybe jellyfish. They're doing well.
Because it was interesting about the toxic nature of oxygen to some species. The fact that the oceans are acidifying is creating a better environment for one of the oldest organisms on the planet to survive, to re-invade the planet, the jellyfish.
Oh, wow. We come back on this.
I think you need to explain that.
So Julian and I did a work since 2015 called the Stenocen, which was started also with sort of wanting to make modular synthesizers that move together in the way that jellyfish do as well, but made us also end up researching a lot jellyfish and discovering how destructive they can be to human infrastructure. So they've blocked nuclear power stations, cooling systems, and they've got into they've created havoc in Japan, I think, in the fishing industry and stuff. And there they done experiments trying to kill off the jellyfish with massive meshes, by slicing them up. But that just creates huge amounts of jellyfish.
Why have the jellyfish been so successful? I think that
because of the pollution, human pollution into the marina. What do we call it? Environment has acidified the oceans. So the oceans become more and more starved of oxygen. So the less oxygen there is in our oceans and the more acid it becomes, the more this creates an environment for certain types of ancient organisms that are 60 million years old to re-establish themselves. And instead of just having died out when the oceans were too much full of oxygen for them, they just went into stasis. They return to their seed-like forms, some of them. They have a possibility to, if the conditions aren't good enough, they will return to a form of pre-egg, pre-embryo, and then they will regrow themselves when the conditions are perfect for them, and this creates these blooms of jellyfish. And I think, is it Shanghai Harbour, where that's the only thing that there is living there now? And so people's reaction to that is, how do we jellyfish as a new food resource or a new resource for makeup or other things we can commercialize.
So yes, I wanted to jump back to, yeah, sorry, I'm jumping back, and that goes another way, but it's connected to this idea that we are aliens. And I want to come back to space is the place, because there is something that is very important for us that we, especially in relations to where we're coming from, is trance. And so, for example, I was listening space is the place as one of the reference for trance. You know what's trance? Yes, trance, la trance, whatever is in other language. So this is very central, because it's something we lost in Western society, and that is key for many other society that survived our destroying. And when you're in trance, I don't know if you experience trance, but when you do experience trance, it's something peculiar. And what they talk in space in the place for me about repetition, and this is like getting in this trance. Why are you getting in trance? Is to get connected to your inner self, to your past, your future, but also to the universe. And make me think that also we keep talking about this the nature and destroying and the nature, but actually we are coming from space. We've been injected in this world, which is now where we live, is our planet Earth is our home, but we're essentially aliens. We're not from this planet. And no, it's true. I mean, we invaded it. You know, we could have invaded another planet, and this is space is the place. You know, and this is why it's inspiring. You know, and we are desperate to go back to somewhere where we're from, but we don't know where we're from. And I think trance and this relations to beyond yourself and your consciousness, your unconsciousness, is key. And then if we're not getting back quickly into regular modalities of trance ourselves, we're gonna continue to destroy, and maybe it's fine because something gonna come out of it. But this is why I connect back to aliens, space is a place, and our connection to that.
Like Planet Sauvage?
I think that Julien speaks words of truth, really. And I totally empathize with this. We are not from here. There is no here. You know, we are from everywhere and from every time. And what for me is super clear at this particular moment is that, you know, the math, science, in a sense, they have all failed us. It's not that I'm anti-scientific, on the contrary. You know, it's just that the world is super big, and we're not from this place anyhow, and you can't rely just on these tools or technologies, you know, to make sense of the world. Like you have medusae, you know, jellyfish. They are gelatinous with tentacles. They live in the oceans. They are toxic. How do you approach? Well, but they're always gelatinous. So how do you?
They will reclaim the planet for themselves at some point.
Brilliant.
And
yeah,
do you know they also are being used to filter microplastics?
Wow.
What does that do to them? What does that do to the jellyfish?
I've no idea.
Does it kill them?
I think a lot of creatures are learning to use plastics as food sources and physical scaffolds. Actually, bacteria, jellyfish, they're thriving on our pollution the way that our distant ancestors learned to use oxygen, which used to be toxic to life.
I think that it's time to kind of recombine, you know, go back to a situation where science, math, culture, art, poetry, as you said, magic, can be all synergetically be fused together and allow for us more ways and perspectives to approach the world. Because you can't approach this situation just, you know, with a sterilized, supposedly objective way of seeing the universe. It's not enough, you know, we know that for sure. You have to go back and use any means we have in our disposal. And yeah, I think that abstract thinking can go very well, can be aligned, in certain contexts with very logical thinking. Math can go very well together with art, with magic. We can have all this, and this is the way, I talk a little bit weird now, but I can make it more personal. So I feel that I am much more comfortable approaching, space, Saturn, energy, and relate with that in poetic terms. And this is not contradictory at all with a more scientific view of things. So why deny myself the opportunity to combine, these different aspects of myself, how I feel about Saturn, what science tells me about Saturn, how I can poetically relate to Saturn, and what I choose politically to represent. So yeah, space is the place in this complicated, multi-faceted way for me.
Maybe to echo Sun Ra, inner space is a lot larger than outer space.
I think going back to Julian's point about trance is essentially about listening or vibration or kind of responding in these particular visceral, sensorial, totally embodied, cognitive embodied ways. And there's no point having any of the things that we have in the world if we don't have some sense of ourselves and some sense of our personal ethic and some sense of our personal place and understanding. And that's the role that trance, or, I wouldn't necessarily call it trance, but, for me, that's the role that, listening or meditation or I think any of the tools, yoga is listening, all these things, can be understood through the idea of listening as this kind of porousness and openness and finding, always searching within yourself as to who you are, what you're doing in the world, why you're doing it, how your ego responds to the world, why you're responding to things. This actually is, it's going back to the very, very basic of going, well, why have we fucked things up? Because people have been egotistical. People haven't understood themselves. People haven't been empathetic with other people. It's if we're feeling lost for where to start, it's starting with yourself, and it's starting, for me, it's starting with listening. Because you go, well, that's a tool. It's just there. It's already there, and we haven't been using it properly necessarily. We can use it better, and so while that's an incredibly elementary way of drawing all the things together, it's kind of it's a way forward in some particular way.
I was thinking about trance and toxicity and our perhaps necessity to connect with the cosmos. And then I remember some experiences when I poisoned myself, controlled, perhaps a little mushroom here, which is toxic, will all of a sudden help me get into a trance state and connect with the cosmos. And perhaps ayahuasca will do something similar, or perhaps the poison of a frog will do something similar. And perhaps we're all, as a human project, we're all inducing some poison into ourselves, into a species, just to escape this reality and all of a sudden poison ourselves a little bit with the jellyfish and with pollution, and eventually connect with something else, as in we need to escape.
So I don't think it's to escape. I think it's to connect.
Well, to escape disconnection. Conveniently,
Yeah, also inner space is a way of exploring outer space. And trance is the way to get there. And maybe one of the roles of art is, in our context, is to get back. And I haven't had that much experience of, say, Aboriginals or trance seems to be an important part of their culture that we've lost and maybe we need to reconstitute. And could you?
I'm not an expert on Aboriginal culture, but what I have been thinking about just in the last bit is something that I saw in India, where a group who are not really artists, they are practitioners, shaman kind of, and they spent maybe 8 hours making this incredible sand mandala with different coloured sands, and we were all watching them, and it's like, wow, this is really wonderful. We would go away and have lunch, come back, they're still working. It was a very, very long, slow process. And then in the evening, I can't remember exactly everything that was, there were 2 women that were put into a kind of a trance. And then they went into the middle of this mandala, and it was at least as big as this circle that we're sitting in. And they undid their hair, and they were sitting cross-legged, and they just started going like this with their hair. And kind of moving. They were cross-legged. I'm not really sure how they were moving, but they basically destroyed the mandala with their hair in a trance. And they were from Kerala. It was something to do with the particular Hinduism of that area. And I don't know exactly what the mandala was. It had a snake in it. And it was about this cycle, I think, of creation and destruction, and this idea that, so I think it had trance in it, it had destruction, it had beauty, it had all of these elements. It was being done by people who I don't know if they would have described themselves as artists. It was being presented at a theatre festival. And it was, there are so many examples like this that are a cultural event that serves a purpose, a ritualistic purpose where the community is not all in the trance. These women are representatives, I guess, of doing this kind of horrific act that as we watched them destroy the mandala, it was almost like we wanted to stop them because we'd seen the effort that went into making it. But it is, there's something in there about the effort of creation, the effort of destruction, and there's probably lots of other stuff in there that I don't have the knowledge to unpack. But that's the image that I've just been remembering while we've been talking the last few minutes. Yeah, and I think and when you were talking about listening, I was also thinking about awareness, and that we often it's much more important to listen and be aware and not actually say anything.
I can follow up on that with art from Africa. As I said, I lived in Africa for 6 years, and I have a small collection of African art, and I've always wondered a lot about it. And first of all, how did I end up with it? And it was basically, I realized that it was a totally different approach to art from the Western world because they weren't making a representation of something. They were actually making a new life. And it took me a long time to understand that because I was fascinated by the forms that they used and how free they were in expressing themselves with a change of those forms, which obviously influenced Western art in the beginning of the 20th century because artists were fascinated by that particular liberty that they had to make new forms. And that's when I realized, it took me a long time. I mean, this was about this stuff like 60 years ago. And it probably took me more than 40 to actually understand why those things were so original. And it's basically because it wasn't representational. It was making a new life. And the other thing that I learned from that eventually was when that life died, that object was useless. It was only Westerners who collected them and gave them some kind of value afterwards. For the African, they were done with it, which is why I ended up with some of them. To give you an example, in Ouagadougou, in the market where we used to go and buy our food, there was an alley where women were selling water. And what they did, they picked up 2 pieces of wood, put it down, put a plank on it, and a basin of water, and sold it by the cup. And one of the times I was walking through there and I looked, and one of these pieces of wood holding up the plank was a statue. And it was a mossy statue of a man. And I looked at it and I said, whoa, ma'am, could I please buy that piece of wood? Which I did. I mean, she didn't, it was useless to her because it was no longer alive. And this is what art is really about, and what we've lost it, because what becomes more important to us now is the object, the trace of that action. And we've turned that into a market.
Not if you do theatre.
Huh?
Not if you do theatre, then it's the moment, it's not the
Well,
object.
yeah, this is, and I'm coming to that actually, because theater is actually making us honest again. Because we're coming back to the whole notion of presentation instead of representation. And this is, I mean, this is, to me, this is the evolution of Western art finally in the beginning of the 19th century, when art was no longer serving religion or power or things like that. It went from representation to presentation. And then what was the presentation? The presentation was basically a presentation of the artist. A friend of mine just sent me a book he did on Yves Klein, and that's what it's all about. You know, he's presenting himself, which is what a lot of artists did in a very, very blunt way. Some of them did it in a more subtle way. But this is the major transition from the Renaissance idea of art to what I call a new Renaissance, as it's represented in art. That art has moved from the idea of representation to presentation. And that makes the individual artist much more important in some ways, if we look at it in a very modest way of just saying, okay, that's one person creating life. And obviously the art market hasn't gotten this because they still need objects. And we've lived this. We've lived this. We saw this happen. I mean, for me, I actually saw it happen in New York in the 80s. Because if you remember the 70s, the big art explosion in the 70s was basically unsellable stuff. There were no more objects. There were performances. You had that big mix with the performing arts, where theater became really important, but there was nothing to sell. And the art world panicked. And I was in New York when this happened, and people told me about it. They said the gallerists panicked. One person, Barry Boom, called all the gallerists together and said, folks, we have a problem. We have no more objects to sell. We have to save painting. And this is what they did. Okay, so if you have to save that article, but then you want to sell it, what do? You market it. And this is the art world today. This is exactly where we are. They have picked up this artificial artistic expression, which kind of lost a certain sense and raison d'être. And so they relied on the market. So the art world now is the art market world.
It's all been commodified, and it's making me think now of Hito Steyer's book Duty Free Art, where she talks about the what are they called, the ports at places like in Switzerland where they have these, like a lot of the art in the world never actually goes anywhere. It just stays in these duty-free containers.
Yeah.
What is it?
There's the Luxembourg port.
Right, and yeah, it's not even about the art. Nobody's looking at it. It's just being traded.
They're outside of any country jurisdiction. Yeah.
And you know, to get back to mathematics, this is capital accumulation, though, and that's this. I mean, the basis of colonial projection is quantifying it, owning it, and storing it, and taking it away, the experience away from other people.
And that, I think at the beginning when Julianne was proposing what we talk about, you were talking about how do we overcome these things. And so one of the ways that we do overcome it is like with open source, because it's, you know, things that are not owned by companies. And it just made me think this morning that Eva got the news that Mozilla Hubs is not going to be available to the public anymore after the end of May. And this is also what happened before we made Upstage with the Palace, the company deciding they're not going to make it anymore. So we made our open source software that we own. And so this is one of the things that we need to do overcome these systems, because it is, they want to own everything. As soon as there's a good idea out there, they work out a way to, look at feminism. They've totally commodified it and sold it back to us. So we have to, these are things that there are tools, there are ways, there are systems. You're making a new structure for the Marcel. So, we have to put our efforts into listening to those things and supporting them by giving them space.
Yes, I want to extend the reflection of Don and you, maybe, with the number and the market. My only experience of trends, this is in New York, in Harlem. This is 30 years ago. And I'm in a church. We authorized to follow a black church, in a black church. And on peut dire celui qui est officier, je sais pas comment on peut dire. Yes. Began to say, "Oh my Lord, I want money to go home." It's very strange. And the people repeat and sing, "Oh my Lord, I want money to go home." And in 20 minutes, some people are in trance. It's very strange for us. Yes, very ambiguous experience.
So I think the main problem for development of art that's really on its roots and that makes sense is capitalism. Because we do the open source thing, we are working for nothing, we don't know how to survive. And we do the things that are necessary for developing the main idea of art further. But we don't know how to survive with that.
One of my favourite older people says once, other people pay us to do the things they want us to do, and we pay to do the things we want to do. So that's how it works for us.
Now it's my turn to say that we're all talking like white privileged people. I mean, the history of the West is not the history of the world. And of course all these things are true, but on the other hand, the world is much bigger and larger than that. And you have, just to say an example, of a very active culture which is still ongoing, and it is there, and it essentially contradicts all that we are saying. You have the Orthodox Christianity, and if you just go to a church, you have all this kind of art which is not representational, it's not perspective, it's not about the artist, so all this is anonymous art, because the idea is, that you are painting as a hand of the god or something, so it's not about you, there is no signature, there is no authorship, and it already transcends, all this idea of the art market. And of course, you are paid as a craftsman. So you are paid by the hour, not because you are important. Okay, so it's a very different paradigm. And then you can just go to a Buddhist temple in Japan or something, just enter a random temple. And there are people doing all these performances, with their voices, and the space. And again, there is nothing that is commodified about this. And this is, I find very interesting. There is a lot of money in this. And this is the thing, that you are talking about a weird situation where they are very comfortable with money in their art, but without the same kind of commodification that happens in the Western world. And then we are us. I mean, I don't do representational art, personally, And for me, and this is where I can talk about myself, because, okay, it's like ethnomusicological or ethnographic thing to talk about other cultures, but I can talk about what I do, and I'm not Westerner. I'm a hybrid, I grew up in the border of different continents and cultures. And my art essentially, and the way that I understand trance, is about kind of losing myself in the process. This is what I try to do. And I have a very strong ego, I'm afraid, you can probably tell. But I don't want that, because we are all connected. And egos are nice to the extent that they create opportunities for interaction, because if you don't have an ego, there is no connection. But on the very same time, they limit the connection because they go stronger. So, this is my quest, trying to kind of dissolve and erase myself in processes and what I have encountered, and this is what my art, I guess, is all about, is to go back to this idea of the art as a laboratory for the exploration of the world. Okay, so I bring materials, I explore materials, and I try to, I set up a situation for the materials, be them algorithms, stones, landscapes, other people, radio frequencies or something. I allow opportunities for them to talk on their own behalf, which is of course impossible because I'm also the one facilitating this, but this exactly is the kind of situation that can bring some kind of trance because I kind of dissolve the boundary of myself in all this situation. And I believe, since I'm doing that for almost 2 decades now, we are much more connected than we would like to think about, and probably much more connected than what we are comfortable to admit to ourselves. But we are very connected, all of us. And the pandemic also saw that very clearly. We have to care for ourselves because caring for ourselves is also caring for the other.
Yeah, Helen said something that rang a bell for me because it's one of the reasons I'm here. This work. And because one of the things I had to do here this time was meet with a jurist who lives here. His name is Alain Supio, and I met with him on Thursday evening. And his theory is that work is not something, it's not a commodity. It's not something to be bought or sold. It's actually a human creativity. And if this is the change in attitude that's absolutely essential today. And I've asked him to join us in developing the jurist approach to some of these ideas. And the other comment too was that capitalism is based on accumulation. And this is something that always was with humanity but wasn't so dominating as it is now. It's the whole idea of accumulating and hiding it in Geneva in an airport storage area. It's just accumulating it. And we've totally, completely distorted our society. And to go back to what you just said, we're in a period now which I actually call a new renaissance, which means by definition exploration. A new renaissance is based on the idea that we no longer use the old paradigm to describe how things work. But what we have to do is build a new one. And that's exactly what we're doing, and we've been doing it for 150 years. My theory, and this is one of the reasons I'm in the network, is that it is the network, that the new paradigm is actually the interactive network, which means basically, going back to what I said yesterday, about neo-animism, we understand everything is alive and connected. That, I think, will be the new paradigm, and that paradigm will guide what our new institutions look like. And those institutions will be based on the idea of connectedness. And this is where we are. We have to do it. I have a feeling that this new renaissance is actually beginning to move out of its destructive period, which is inevitable with a renaissance. It's a very violent time, and possibly moving into a constructive period where we start building these new institutions. But we start building these new institutions with a different understanding of how things work and how interconnected they all are. And I mean, this is what's been governing my own actions with the network for 40 years, frankly. And a renaissance to me is something that results from a time when both science and art are two major ways of looking at the universe and interacting with it. When science and art redefine reality in its representation. When that happens, new paradigm, new way of understanding how things work. And I think that's where we are historically. And art is fundamental to that, at that kind of a period historically. Art is where we do that experimenting.
Yes, I absolutely agree with Don there. And I think I just want to touch back, and I know absolutely nothing about open source because of the dilemma of feeling disconnected from the ability to deal with open source. But I think there's such a amazing. I've always admired open source communities and organisations that build around open source, because the way to deal with a lot of these things is to be able to get your own hands on things, as Marinos was saying as well, that, building things from scratch. And, I'm now in my mid-50s and I have only just started to begin to build things with my hands. And some of that is knitting, like some of that is, reclaiming women's crafts, and things like that. And it's unbelievably empowering. Like and it had to get to this point where, there are literally no fucks given to go, I'm going to be a grey-haired lady on a train knitting. But it's incredibly empowering because I can make something myself. I can take something back from it, needing someone to do it for me. And so, what I would love to see in the future, and I'd like to think it's not too late for me to be able to tap into it, is more of us that understand programming, and more of us that can, because I always think of open source and go, I think I don't quite know enough about the programming to be able to deal with a lot of the, if you really want to drill into the open source stuff. And so the more wonderfully accessible things and workshops and, the wonderful things that Apôtre François does, the better. And that's also where the new paradigm comes from and where the new community comes from. It comes from these DIY networks that have always come up through media arts and through artistic activities. Yeah.
I just want to say, you saying you don't know enough about it and you want to know more about it in order to be able to engage with it. This is also what I come up with, and kind of because I come from theatre, and when I first came into digital art, I felt like I didn't know anything, because what I realised later was I kind of plunged into this art school world, and everybody talked about Deleuze and Guattari, and I was like, who the fuck? What? Oh my God, I haven't read anything.
I had exactly the same thing coming from theatre.
I couldn't contribute until I thought, I'm just going to, because I have other knowledge. So with open source, I'm not a programmer, I have no idea. Usually when the developers start talking in about 2 seconds, I'm like, it's off here. But we talk, and it doesn't matter if we don't understand everything. We cannot understand everything. We cannot all be specialists in everything. And also coming from New Zealand, we are a land of generalists. We don't have specialisation opportunities because we have to be able to do everything because we're not very many people. We have to be able to change a car tyre, put a fence up, bake the bread, do the knitting, and code the software. Otherwise, nothing's going to happen. So I think it's great that you express that fear, because it is a fear of being shown as not knowing something, and we have to actually let go of that and not be afraid to ask a stupid question, because no question is stupid, but also for the other people that do have the specialised knowledge to be able to not use that to keep people out. Yeah. And that we can actually talk to each other, where it's like, it's okay that you can understand Python intricacies and all this zeros and ones. I don't need to understand that for us to be able to talk and make a piece of software that works, and for me to have a good understanding. And also, this is what the ETC is about. It's about, and I think really as a digital artist, it's really important that I have some kind of understanding. I wouldn't drive a car if I didn't know how to change a tyre. I shouldn't be using digital art or digital tools to make my art if I don't have the ability to restart my computer or do these kind of things, So I think we really need to embrace those fears and jump in and do it anyway.
This is all great, and I think that, as you very succinctly explain, knitting and creating something with your hands is a new way to connect with the world. This is how I would call it. And what you explain is also this, there is a lot at stake. It's, how we are in this world, and how we are connected with other people. One way to connect, which is very known to the Western world, is, theorizing about the world. And you have all these new trends in philosophy, which is about materialism, and objects and object-oriented philosophy, and all this. But to a great extent, this is about, thinking about things. And this is a very powerful way to connect with the world, of course, and through metaphors and all this. But actually doing is another great and super more powerful, in my opinion, way to connect with the world. And personally, I'm very much influenced by American pragmatism, and all this school of sharing your life with people and objects and technologies and processes and create opportunities to actually do things. And you learn through doing, and you connect with the world through doing. And then there is this probably more, you might be more accustomed, I don't know, to this, but this kind of indigenous metaphysicals, thinking about Viveiro de Castro and also connecting with neo-animism as Don Send, this kind of understanding. Viveiro de Castro talks about this, that in this Amerindian metaphysics, everything is supposed to be a person, everything. So, be it for a rock or a human or an animal. And for them, there is a certain magical, transcendental action of eating the other as a way to adopt their own perspective, the other side perspective. And I think this is also, it's totally alien to Western thinking, but from a neo-animistic point of view, I think this is also very powerful, So this is another paradigm of how to connect with the world. You eat it. Okay, and it might sound violent, and I guess the word is violent, anyhow, even for non-American people. But yeah, there are many ways to do this, but interconnectedness is something that you can't escape from.
Well, I just wanted to think about knitting. I knit too, and it is an algorithm, actually, over and under. So there's an algorithmic side, but to me, open source is a craft, and it gives people that independence of being a craft person who understands their medium, who doesn't rely on extended structures which can easily be commodified. And that just makes me think about how closely aligned the technical or technological and ideological are. And that was the point I was trying to make really, really early, is that there are these enabling factors. And right now, TCP/IP, which is the foundation of the internet, Vint Cerf invented it, is actually inherently non-hierarchical. And all the political convulsions we see right now are like what happened after Gutenberg. When printing came around, there were a lot of wars for a while. But I think open source is really a form of resistance, and it's also a way of undermining hierarchy. And the other point I was sort of making is information and all this cuneiform tablets and stuff enabled hierarchy. And now the hierarchy is trying to reestablish itself. So I think we're at a really, really delicate moment right now where, like, Apo, Helen, your project, Upstage, these are the things that are going to stop the encroachment of the surveillance state and these really, really exquisitely intimate forms of control on all of us.
Can I make
I just want to...
Just a really quick one, because it's funny to me that...
Yep.
He wants to talk about, yes.
Yeah, I think it back.
No, I mean, I think it's a wonderful coincidence that has just come up twice by two people. The works of Duchamp, Les Stoppages. Does everybody know those pieces? Okay, he made 3 meters, right? He took a piece of string a meter long, held it a meter high, dropped it, traced the line, and did this 3 times. So what he did basically was build 3 standard meters. So he's saying there's more than one way of looking at the world. It's a key piece. He considered it to be his most important work. But he called them stoppage, which is a very strange word in French. But stoppage means repairing the knit. When I came here, you would see it in front of dry cleaning stores. They would always say stoppage. And that meant basically that they repaired nylons. They repaired the knit of a nylon. And it's completely disappeared. But that's what the word means. It means repairing the weave. Huh? Yeah.
So just
Yeah.
I'll let
Yeah.
somebody else speak, and then I wanted to make a comment on open source.
So that was to react about what you said, Gail, about knitting, because that's been a long time. But I am an engineer, so I was in a school of learning the sciences and the technologies and very complicated things. And once I start meeting new people, they were like, I can't see technology as something magical in a sense that it's how it is functioning. Is hidden from me, and I don't know. My mind cannot perceive how my voice is here and then going here, and then with nothing to physically connect them. But I think it's not that complicated, and it's something that is making someone has the power when we don't know how all this is working. Someone that is not us, and it's we talked about yesterday about how engineers are just people who are doing things, but they can make this bridge between I mean, not just engineers, but just making the bridge between what you want to achieve and what is the technology that is achieving this in the world we live in. And it's also my perspective has changed about how we have built such a complex society with complex technologies, and what we just need now just to survive for a starter point, and then to be comfortable with, and then all the things we have on top, just like making electricity, which is we need it, even though it is because we are kind of poisoned with the technology. We need the electricity. It's not so hard to make yours. We don't need a big thing with uranium. We don't even know what it is. I don't know what it looks like. I know how it works. I've never seen uranium in my life. It seems so poisonous, and we can't do anything with the garbage and things. And so even without a solar panel or anything like this, we can produce electricity. And I've not learned this in my how do you say études in the studies in school. I just looked at people and I wanted to say this also, that different parts of the world have their technologies, which is sometimes based on complex things and sometimes in simple things, but it shows what they need and what they wanted to harness from nature and from all that is a big reservoir of energy. And that's a fine way of looking at societies which are different from us. What do they want to harness from the world? I mean, as people, I'm going out today in the world, and do I need to be on my phone, or do I fill my day with knitting? And it's it makes me understand I don't even need. I'm afraid of losing my phone, but knitting is reminding me that it's okay not to have a phone and to just be there knitting all day. And it's useful to knit. It's less useful to be on my phone. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. But if I have a sock, I'll be hot in winter. I'll be warm in winter. So yeah, just it helps make everything in a balanced. Yeah. Yes.
Yes, excellent.
You
Okay.
might be interested to know that the Vaseline glass, the Vaseline, it has 1 to 2% of uranium.
Okay.
So
Okay.
if you ever touch one of these, you will have an experience of uranium.
Nice. Anyone?
I just have to say one thing. Uranium actually is a metabolite of an ancient bacterium. So uranium deposits are concentrated because these bacteria actually used it in their metabolism millions and billions of years ago. So even that is kind of part of nature. But
Of course it is.
So, yeah, sorry, I had a point which is a bit side because it was maybe a pedantic point about the utopic ideas of open source. I just wanted to make a distinction between free Libre open source software and open source, because by being open source, which I think Mozilla Hubs is, or is for the moment, is allowing everybody to engage their enthusiasm and coding skills into something that seems on the surface that it could be for a greater community purpose, and then closed later, for example, because the open source licenses allow you to close that source later with different mechanisms, whereas a free Libre open source license does not allow that to happen. So the stuff remains with the community and with the people that are working on those things. So there is a distinction, and I think Facebook and Google have exploited open source coding and also the openness of their networks in order to monetize the information that they get from us. So there's also different ways, I guess, different ways capitalism moves to reclaim a lot of the action and a lot of the work that people put in creatively.
Yeah.
Okay, I was just going to be devil's advocate here about art and commerce, because there's also small artists making things they have to eat. And I was on a panel like 20 years ago with Mark Coniglio, who wrote this beautiful software for his dance company, and someone in the audience complained that he was charging for his software, and he leans to me and he's like, that's how I pay for the dance company, is by charging for the software. My sister's a jeweler. There's no way that she can make her jewelry without getting paid for it. Right, so we have in many cases not just the skill set. Okay, in her case, there's also expensive materials, but she's had people come up to her and say, how come that costs so much? You know, like, how long did it take you to make that? And her answer is like 50 years and a half hour, right? Because there's a lot of skill in how she got to that point. So there's a flip side of it, which is open source. I appreciate about the Libre, but we have to have enough money to eat, which brings it back to our privilege. Because if you are working all day or working 3 jobs, you don't have time to participate.
Okay, but that's the privilege maybe in a Western community also, because the free Libre open source community is something that is massively global and diverse and enters countries with computers that are very dated, that might not run the latest, greatest apps that we can all profit from here. But it also allows other communities that are maybe not so privileged financially or in terms of government resources, etc., to access all those things as well. So it's not just finance, it's very community thinking. And I appreciate that people need to live off art, of course they do.
I mean,
but it's just a different way of thinking about where you situate yourself and how you make your living.
Yeah.
And how the cultural community thinks about artists.
Which is where the idea of a universal wage, or a kind of, you know, whichever way you want to term that, you know, is still, you know, something that really I think should be pursued in that way, where particularly with AI, if we do want to use technology in these particular ways where they are starting to take other jobs, you know, people actually, I think someone said work, you know, is in our biology. You know, it's not like we don't want to work. We just want to work at something that is satisfying. And so, you know, if there was something like the universal wage, then, you know, it seems like there's so many potentials that could be unleashed, and so many, you know, it's an ideal, but so many injustices that could maybe be redressed, or imbalances that could be redressed.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of covered most of what I was going to say, but it was also connecting into what Don's been saying about creating a new paradigm. Like, we do live in this capitalist economy at the moment, and we do all have to eat and pay the rent, or, you know, whatever, and we all have very unequal situations. So what Jenny was saying about open source being really used in the global south or in other places where people just don't have the money for Apple and all the rest of it, but also those companies are pushing us to have to spend more money. Like, you have to keep upgrading your system, and you have to pay for that. But it's also about getting different income streams or finding different ways, like giving a workshop. I mean, earn more money from giving workshops than doing all the rest of the stuff with the the software. But I think we need to find new models like that. We need to find new systems and new ways that mean that Elon Musk isn't getting 48 billion for doing fuck all as CEO of Tesla, while the rest of us are scrabbling around trying to get a few pennies together to do something actually useful. And yeah, also looking at, like, I don't want to say AI, I want to call it machine learning actually, and how we can actually say that it's useful and helpful when it does that. So let's focus on making it do that and not worry about all the other stuff until, you know, it's what we need. Yeah, focus on the helpful stuff.
Actually, yes, okay. I want to bring something to this, and I'm glad we're coming back to this because it's about also one of the roots of why we've been doing it for more than 20 years. Is the liberté. La liberté is, I think, whatever you say about I need to pay my fucking rent. Yes, but maybe you need to pay your fucking rent. But how much you want to be free from that, and how much you're ready to give for that. So it's true, we all have to pay for this. But that brings me another point of view. I had some discussion with this musician, Keith Rowe, who lives around here. It's a very important musician for experimental music. And we talked about failure, being like the notions of we have this feeling, and joining back everything together, the feeling of not being able to do something and not being able to be an artist, for example, in a lot of our case. And we just had a funding cut from the department 100% and region 100%. And then so it's bring the questions, how are we going to continue to survive, because it's being cut and more. But we have to find new ways, and we don't want to compromise on la liberté, you know, keep this word. And there is this notions at the core of it, which is forget the knowledge that you share. You share the knowledge and you forget. But then it brings to your position as an artist of doubt and being useful to society, because the departments, for example, here, they want the artist to be useful socially. So they give you a job with peanuts to go and help people are poor, and you poor yourself, and you're trying to survive. So this is also the positions that we'll be putting in, and then how to survive with this activity, this primal of language before the society after, and then everything is surround bureaucratic, and then you can't do this. The share and then the memories, the transformation of society and this liberté, you know. So I think it's not about just paying your rent where it's behind. It's also what society you want. And I agree with you about we have to continue to build models, because when like before Google, before 2006, we were like thinking this is the way to go, and we were really radical about it. Like we have to, and then when we seen Google arriving, we say, oh shit, we're fucked, because these people, they're gonna monetize this and gonna make money in Californian fucking style. Like, yeah, let's go with Smile and everything. And then they did really like pervert the whole open source idea, which is fortunately flossed and not open source. I reinforce this because the libre is essential. But it's not about like this company selling his software. It's not about this, because it's not about individual. It's about this community. And over the years, we've seen the free software and the Linux being adapted to even indigenous people in all the global, everywhere people are adapted to the language, to what they wanted, and they recoded themselves what they wanted. But what's behind also is that it changed the whole view on proprietors, and then how everything from the seed to nature is being copyrighted. And this is why open also, when it appeared in the 80s, is like, hang on a minute, it's not about the code itself, it's about everything. Why suddenly we look at it and say everything is copyrighted? How are we gonna get out of that? You know, because that's our life.
That's what I want to respond to, because it's a question of symbolism. And the Industrial Revolution, which brought us the assembly line, in French called la chaîne, created a new symbol of humanity as an extension of the machine. And this is what we're still living with. We're living with the idea that human beings are nothing more than an extension of the mechanical world. And this is our identifier now, and this is what's got to change fundamentally. This is why we're supposed to bow to technology. We're supposed to we believe that technology is a neutral force, and therefore we should bow to it and its demands. And it's just totally turned the whole thing around. But that's a product of the Industrial Revolution. When people are working on la chaîne, the assembly line, they're an extension of a machine. And this is what we've done for over a century. We've created that image of humanity in the image of the machine. And we've got to break that. Because they keep doing this to us, saying, oh, technology is neutral, technology doesn't make judgments, technology, and it's just bullshit. And this is what we have to break now, and that's part of the renaissance that I'm talking about.
Actually, it's relevant to your point about that. Quickly, we're the golem.
Yeah.
You know, you were talking, Mariana, about clay and this advanced technology, and we've always projected ourselves onto it and then subjected ourselves to it. So we are the golem.
And there is also a deeply...
That you want it to do, right? You want to explain the golem?
There's also a deeply political situation here, starting, I guess, with the end of the Second World War, where people gathered together and they kind of said that, okay, we can't let this happen again. But, by the way, the American troops live in Europe, they didn't went back to America. They went to Vietnam. So it never really changed anyhow. But the thing is that at some point, the left, and the global left somehow stop believing that there is a way out of capitalism. So the agenda has shifted, now the discussion is not about should we have capitalism or something else. The discussion is, how to make capitalism a little bit more friendly to the weak. Yes. Okay, and this is a problem because now, I'm not massively old, but I'm not massively young either.
By the way, that's Stigler.
What?
This is Stigler.
Could be.
It's just.
The thing, though, is that 20 years ago, you could never say, where I come from, something like health services. You couldn't say this, because we were grown up with the thinking that health is not a service. It's not something you pay. It's not commodity. It's something that is given to you and to everybody. And now, they talk about health services. And of course, for American, this is a reality since many decades ago. But where I come from, it wasn't like this, So you can see this happening. Now everything turns into something that can be bought and sold. And this is dystopian.
So it's
branded.
Maybe just, because I've grown up with the NHS, which is the National Health Service. And the notion of service in the British culture is something that you give freely to society, as opposed to commodification, and that's something that's maybe come a bit later. Yeah.
But to speak about capitalism, the first capitalism, it's for the society. People create industry, and they create things, objects, for the people. Car, freezer, and so. And if you have a car, a freezer, and a house, you have a good life. You are in the image of the society. But now it's totally different with Apple, with Google. Apple invent with iPhone a new capitalism, because you can not iPhone. This is the first device for the music. I not iPhone. Yeah, iPhone. Sorry, iPod. Apple invent the first object who respond to your desire. You can have the music you want. This is the first time in the world you can change the music today, and this is a new kind to see the desire you want to have. This is totally different, and now the link between the people are destroyed because everyone wants to have the best for him or for her. And Google extended this idea, and now we are loose.
I don't think we lost. Not yet.
Cassettes came out earlier, right? So I think the Walkman.
But I think what he means,
first time we could do it.
it's about infinite. You know, like on an iPod, you know, as a cassette, you still had to have different objects. An iPod, you could have gigabytes, even the early ones. I think that's what the
I
shift.
don't know. Once I had to teach a class, and they asked me to talk about what's the greatest technological change in the 20th century, and I was sure it was the computer, and all the reading I found was about recorded music was the big technical change. That's true.
That transformed and actually hobbled people's ability to make their own music. Everybody used, if you read novels, I mean, records of life in the 90s. Yeah. And I love recorded music.
Yeah, but lots of people make music now because of Ableton and things like that. You know, like I think I don't know if that equation's quite the same anymore. Of going, we used to play pianos in the house. I think there's a bazillion people making music in their bedrooms now. You know, I don't think the music production world has diminished. But yeah, sorry.
Are they doing it with headphones, or is anybody else listening? Like with playing the piano in the house, it's a family thing that you do with people, whereas all the people in the bedroom with Ableton have got their headphones on and they're doing it just on their own. Yeah,
but I mean, there's still concerts and there's still, those resources are still shared, but the thing that I was just wanting to respond to before is, in some ways there's still, and it's still back down to, is it the fault of technology or is it the fault of people or is it the fault of... There's nothing wrong with having a certain level, as you were saying, of comfort. It's about the excess. It's always about the fact that we're always driven to have more and to never be happy with just what it is that we have. So we can all be incredibly comfortable and happy with a certain amount of something, in a kind of socialist way, we pretty much all have the same level of something, then, that's fine. It's this pursuit that you must have more, and you must have more, which is where excess comes from, which is where the need to make more money comes from. It's where, it's this idea of excess always instead of kind of settling into your own resources, I think,
And I think that's the biggest myth of capitalism, is that we can all have more and we can all keep having more, when in fact it's only such a small number of people that are having more, and that's dependent on everybody else having less.
But then it makes everyone makes a lot of people want more.
The want is still pushed onto us, but it's a false want, because they sell us the idea that we can have that everything when we can't.
So you have this narrative that says that, okay, the free market, and everything, you work, you make money, this is kind of the myth of capitalism. And then you have health services becoming product, so something that you buy. And then you have education also becoming a product. But when you have COVID, and, then Lufthansa comes and says, okay, we can't stand this because we are such a powerful, capitalist company, and the market is so good that if we have to limit our flights for 1 or 2 months, we can't afford it. So then you have taxpayers' money, millions of dollars supporting them. So the system does care for the powerful ones, okay, but it doesn't care if you can't afford fixing your health issue. You die. So it's not a question of being comfortable. It's even more fundamental than this. It's a question of life and death. If you are poor, you die. If you don't have enough money, you stay educated. If you can't afford paying the college of your children, and what happens next? I mean, then they might privatize school. I think we're in a very critical situation at the moment, actually.
And for Elon Musk and the heads of Ford and other massive car companies and oil industries, they need to sell more, so they need to make more, so they need us to buy more, even if we don't necessarily need so much to pay for them to pay their rent.
So stoppage, is that the word? You engaged in stoppage. That is a radical act of resistance.
I think we're gonna have to wrap up.
Do we have a,
have a stoppage?
Positive stoppage?
Yes.
For ending on.
Yes. I think for those who are around, there's some grignotage at Chalet Beach. Grignotage. It's not guillotine. It's grignotage. No, guillotine. It's not the same. Sorry. And so if you're still around this evening, there's some great performance and live music. I just wanted to finish with a quote from Zbigniew Karkowski, which gonna suit us tonight. Music ends when words stops. So see you tonight.
Hello. Oh. Damn.